Oh, right. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Yes, and I don't have. You just get over here. And say, and then they'll say, oh, mine, and they'll. Well, they did me. Saturday night will be our spring festival, and then we'll start our. It's. Yes. Susie and Susie's wife. Oh, that's big stuff. We go. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's every now and then I could go and get them. It's big stuff. The building is up. Yeah, they're ready to do that. Well, no, we are going to have trans things that take up. There's going to be a parking lot up there. So it's we've already got the state saying do it. You'll come off instead of one. A road like that, you'll come off of 152 and turn and go over and where your real house is. It's literally right into our one of our big parking lots down there. Okay.
We can.
Yeah, so. It's not, but it's still very, the valley today, it's like.
Hi, everyone. Are we ready to get started? This mic is. Sibilant. Can everyone hear me without the mic, or is the mic better? It doesn't matter. Yeah, I can hear.
I can hear you better without the mic.
Without the mic? It's better?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
better without the mic.
That's so funny. All right, we'll do without the mic. All right. Hi, thanks for coming today. I'm excited to be here in the great state of West Virginia. Today we're going to talk about social media. I'll give a little introduction about myself and my background and basically share why I have the authority to speak to you on such things, and then we'll get right started. Because we have a small group today, that's actually a good thing because we can make it a little bit more interactive. So if you have questions or anything like that throughout, just feel free to raise your hand or just holler them out. I'm happy to answer them. Also, afterwards, I have submitted the links to the presentation, so everyone should get the URL to the presentation afterwards. Throughout the presentation on the slides, you'll see some resources, and they'll be linked when you receive the deck later. So if you want to jot them down, that's perfectly fine, but also you'll have it later. All right, so who am I? This is me with slightly longer hair. I just got my hair cut yesterday. I got it cut all off again. It was like down to here before I got it cut. So my name is CeCi DADISMAN, and I'm an arts administrator. And I've been doing marketing, communications, fundraising for nonprofit arts organizations for a little over 20 years at this point. And I am always so happy to speak at this conference. I've been speaking at this conference for quite a few years now. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, PA, which makes it all the more serendipitous. My grandparents are from Barrow County, Wheeling, Gasoline area. My dad was born in Charleston, grew up there until he moved to Morgantown because my grandpa was a law professor at WVU. I'm a third generation mountaineer. Let's go mountains. I'm in Marshall country here. So I made sure to wear my WVU pin, bring a little bit of that mountain pride. And I still have family in the Morgantown area. So I always love to do anything to support organizations within the state. And this is part of that for 20 years. So are we ready? All right, let's go. How many people here use social media actively for your museum? Everyone? Yeah, okay, good. Would you say you are something kind of thank you. How many of you would say that you are an expert at social media at your organization? No, kind of like moderate level social media, kind of beginner level social media. Okay. So with all of the presentations that I do, and I'm doing 2 more tomorrow, I hope you'll come to those as well. This is a safe space. There are no stupid questions, right? If I'm using terminology that you've never heard or you don't understand, please let me know. It's always tough doing conference speaking because I always know there's a lot of different backgrounds in the room and I don't always know what might be a buzzword and what might not be. So don't be afraid to ask any questions. So today we're going to talk about accessibility, specifically in social media, although these concepts are going to be applicable for really any sort of digital communication. And I'm doing a session tomorrow that's more specifically about making your website accessible. But today, these concepts will absolutely be applicable for a website, but a lot of these are also applicable for emails. Does everyone send out digital emails through like MailChimp or iContact or something like that? Okay. So a lot of these things are going to be analogous for that as well. So when we talk about why do we need to make our social media or our digital communications accessible, at a very basic level, there are a lot of people in our city, county, state, in the country that might have some sort of visual impairment. And social media primarily, right, is consumed visually. Certainly there are multimedia things like videos, audio, but we're primarily consuming it visually. And even if we don't realize, we're not putting out content specifically for a particular segment of the population, there probably are people in your target audiences that may not have full vision. And so that's really where this sort of stems from, but also we're going to have some aspects of this that are going to be applicable to people who use any sort of assistive device when they're operating a phone or a computer. When we talk about accessibility, and this happens a lot with websites, we tend to think about it as something separate that we have to think about, as it's over here in this box. It's something extra. It's really not. We need to think about it as being baked in. Because a lot of these concepts are not only for people who may use an assistive device, but they're also good for everyone else as well, right? The one example that I give to sort of put this in perspective is this example here about curb cuts, right? Initially, curb cuts were put in place right through the ADA. But if you're pulling a suitcase behind you, right, you're also very thankful for that curb cut. Or if you've ever been on a walk, you know, in a downtown area with sidewalks with a stroller, if anyone here also has children, you're very thankful for that curb cut. So a lot of these things that I'm going to be talking about today are beneficial and make our social media easier to consume for everyone, not just people using assistive devices. Here's one of those things. Some universal concepts about social media posts and the elements of sort of an optimized social media post. And we could do a whole session on content and, you know, imagery, and, you know, how to make graphics and strategies and all this sort of thing. That's a little bit of a separate topic. But for right now, we'll just go through some of the main elements that make a good, solid social media post. The first thing is always an engaging visual of some kind, whether that's a photo or a video or a graphic, right? Something that's going to make someone stop in their feed. The next thing is concise text. And this topic tends to be a little controversial because there are those that say we need the long form social media is really what's going to get people to read. I say go concise, right? If you have more to say that is genuinely interesting and genuinely compelling, absolutely go long form, right? But if you know that as you're scrolling through on social media, right, you're moving pretty fast. And whatever is there in the content has to stop you. And that's probably going to be something that's a little bit more concise. Also, a clear call to action. What do you want people to do after they see or consume that content? That call to action can be a link over to your website for more information about something. It can be an instruction to like or heart or whatever, or share that particular post. But what do you want people to do after they consume that? And then, and this is just something really for us, is tracking. Does anybody ever use beauty ads in their social media post? Okay. So a beauty ad is going to be a tracking link. And they're free to make. Follow-up question. How many people have Google Analytics on their website? Okay. If you don't know, or if you do not, that is now your number one priority after attending this session, even though it's not necessarily specifically social media related. You want to make sure that you have Google Analytics installed on your website. And if you're not sure if you do, ask whoever sort of handles your website to see if it's installed. If it is already installed, ask for access to the data, okay? Any communications campaign is going to funnel traffic over to your website, right? You want to get people from some other place, whether that's a postcard they received in the mail, whether it's a commercial they heard on the radio, whether it's an email, whether it's a social media post. You want to get people from there over to your real estate, right, to find out more. And then the next part of that is you want to be able to know what people are doing when they're on your website. So that you can determine was that campaign effective? Is the stuff that I find or that I feel is important on my website, are people actually accessing that stuff? Are people seeing it? Is there some sort of barrier to getting all the information, right? And Google Analytics is going to be the tool that you're going to want to use to do that. Even if you're using something like WordPress or Squarespace or one of these other website providers that say they have their own analytics, you still absolutely want to have Google Analytics this time. Doesn't cost you anything to use Google Analytics. Okay. I get no compensation for recommending Google Analytics. It is an industry standard for a reason. Okay, so tracking, back to tracking. That's how this all circles back, right? Google Analytics. Being able to track and look at our data from social media is so important for those reasons also, right?
when you post something on Facebook, you're probably noticing how many likes, clicks, comments, shares there are, right? We also want to be able to make sure that there's tracking installed so that when somebody clicks from that Facebook post over to our website, we know what they do. Right? I was actually just on a call with a client yesterday, and we were reviewing some of their Google Analytics data, and they had posted what they felt was a very compelling, important blog post on their social media. And we used a tracking URL, which I'll explain on just one second. When the traffic came over to their website, we saw that overwhelmingly people were spending only a couple of milliseconds on that page. So now they are going to go back and say, okay, well, what was the post about? I didn't make this post. So what was the post about? Was what was on the actual landing page different than what people were expecting from the post? Where was that disconnect? There. So tracking links called UTMs are going to be important. And Google has a free link builder. And it's called the Google Campaign URL Builder. The URL for that is an URL. But if you Google Campaign URL Builder, what it will allow you to do is to assign a campaign and media and a source essentially for that. I highly recommend, if you're feeling nerdy,
I highly recommend checking that out and testing out using some UTMs for your social media posts so that you can track specifically when that traffic comes into your website, where it came from. All right, let's talk about text and formatting when it comes to accessibility for messaging.
plain language is the name of it. And this is also something that's the name of the game for everyone, right? As organizations, as museums, as nonprofits, we all have wording and terminology that we use, right? Jargon that we use, that the average person may not understand. Though that jargon could be terminology about the nature of your museum, right? The type of exhibits you have, the type of objects that you have in your museum. Or it could simply be jargon about the museum world as a whole, or as an event you're hosting, right? So it's important to notice what that jargon is and be able to eliminate it or change it so that you're just speaking in plain language. And plain language does not mean dumbing things down. It just means speaking plainly, right? Let's say you meet someone at this conference who's unfamiliar with your museum, unfamiliar with the subject matter, right? And you're not going to immediately start talking to them using all kinds of super jargony words because they're not going to understand. Same thing. A really great way to test your messaging to speak jargon is to put it into ChatGPT. This is one of my favorite uses of AI. ChatGPT or Gemini, those are the two sort of free ones right out there. You can put in a fundraising letter or a marketing release or a social media post, and you can say, rewrite this for someone who is an average person that doesn't know anything about my museum, and see what it changes, see what word it changes. There might be some jargon in there that you can understand. I have an example of this in just a second.
So when you're making a social media post, it's important to know the audience that you're trying to reach. Is the message going to be relevant and easy to understand? And again, what do you want people to do after they see that particular post? Here's my example, and on this screen, it's very small, so I will read this for you. So we know what these are, right? I'm talking to you. Like, explain when I use this example for like regular conferences, I always have to explain what a wall label is. But I don't have to explain that to this group, knowing my audience. This is a wall label for Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory. You're familiar with that piece, right? It's the watches that they're melting. This is a very good example. Use it. So there's two wall labels here. The first one is sort of the regular one. It's the one that the curator and the art historians wrote, right? This bottom one here says for kids, which right away I think is a misstep, right? But so the top one, as you might expect, is kind of jargon. There's a lot of words that don't necessarily connect with regular people. The persistence of memory, in the persistence of memory, hard objects become inexplicably limp with a bleak and infinite landscape. While the metal watches attract ants like rotting flesh. It goes on and on and on. It talks about, I'm gonna have to put on my glasses because that's how old I am. It's small in my monitor. All right. Like rotting flesh, Salvador Dali painted his fantastic visions with what he called the most imperialist fury of precision, giving the representations of dreams a tangible and credible appearance. Right? And it kind of goes on and on and on in this kind of very flowery language, right? That we like to use frequently as museums because we have a way that and we want to, you know, we want to be like this, right? The one below, now that's not plain language. I wouldn't say that's plain language, right? And my mom is an art historian and I am a huge museum nerd. So I like to think that I'm like pretty like, I vibe with museums just in general, okay? But even that to me, if I'm not familiar with Dali, if I'm not familiar with that piece, that doesn't really say anything to me. Now the one that's for kids, which I think is a misstep right off the bat, right? Says, this small painting is one of the best known pictures in the history of modern art. Right off the bat. Not dumbing it down, just saying it plain. It is, right? In the background, you can see the ocean. The cliffs are like those in Cadaqués, a town in Spain where the painter Salvador Dali grew up. When you take a closer look, you will see some strange objects in the foreground. Clocks that seems to be melting, ants swarming over a gold fob watch, and something that looks like a face draped over a small bridge on the ground. Salvador was a member of a group of artists called the Surrealists, who wanted to make pictures that were like their dreams. Do you remember your dreams? I like that one better. Right? I like it better. Admittedly, like the art nerd that I am, right? So I always use this example because I think it's a perfect example of sort of plain language, thinking about how we speak, thinking about our audiences, right? And I'm sure that this museum and these curators are ruining the day because everybody, when this came out, this went viral on, well, at the time, this is very viral on Twitter at the time, and it was a huge sort of sensation. Because this is so small, I'm going to go over these sort of quickly. These are some more examples of plain language, right? So I took this from the LA Phil. And this is an example of format, which also helps accessibility as well. Anyone who's using a screen reader, the screen reader is going to pick up that format. And it can be helpful in organizing that content. This I also did by just telling it to simplify. Does anybody like a symphony or classical music fan? Yeah, and my dad's a musicologist. Yes, excellent. I like that. So this is from the LA Philharmonic. I will call them out on this by name. They know me. This is their original description. So this is a description in a marketing piece. Right? Even though you probably can't read it because it's too small, you can just see it's a block of text, right? And this is for the program has two pieces on it, Brahms A minor string quartet and Fauré's piano quartet in C minor, right? Right off the bat, they start out with some pretty gosh darn musicological stuff. And I can say that because my dad's a musicologist. I say that lovingly, okay? It starts off, Joseph Joachim, a violinist and best and close friend of Brahms, lived by the motto, frei aber einsam, free but lonely. So there's even German in the first sentence, right? Clearly they're speaking to an audience, right? They're speaking to an audience of classical music nerds, right? And it goes along and along in a similar way as that first wall label. I told ChatGPT to simplify it, right? And this is pretty close to, now, you never want to just copy and paste what ChatGPT like tells you. You never want to do that. But this is pretty close, for the purposes of this example, pretty close to what it did, because it did a pretty good job, actually. You can right away see the difference in formatting. Don't be afraid to use things like bullets in your writing, because we scan, right? People who are using an assistive device also on social media or email, anything like that, it can tell what's a heading, what's bold, what's in a bullet, these kind of things as well. So the simplified version starts out with, experience the power of chamber music, right? An evening of Brahms and Fauré. This one I did new to classical music. Join us for an intimate and engaging concert featuring 2 chamber music masterpieces, right? Very simple. And then bulleted what the 2 pieces are, right? And then some additional text about the emotion, something about the experience. The great thing about museums is that we all have a place, right? So attending a museum or an event, right? It's more than just the thing that they are going to see. It's the whole experience from when they pull in the parking lot. Actually, it backs up from that, from when they go. All of this is part of that. Okay, so we all agree that we will make an effort to use more plain language in our communications. Now let's talk about formatting. What makes formatting accessible or not? Rule of thumb, especially on social media, right? Text should be text and images should be images. That's the best way to make it accessible. Text on social media, unless there's some native way, which currently there isn't, to make bold or italics or anything like that, right? Text should just be text. If you add any kind of fancy formatter, odds are it's not going to be accessible anymore. So I have some examples here. So tabs and spacing. So always write content from left to right with no forced formatting, because the forced formatting usually is going to make it make it not accessible. So I don't know if anybody's a SpongeBob fan. I'm not a SpongeBob fan, but this was brought to my attention. The SpongeBob way of writing, and this is really hard to see on here, is where you intersperse capitals with lowercase, right? Not accessible, because the screen reader does not know how to deal with that, right? Also, you can see here, there's forced formatting where they're making columns by using periods, dots in between. That is not accessible. Again, screen reader does not know how to handle that at all. Always use correct punctuation as well. So make sure you got your right periods and your commas and everything in place. And then letter case, we just talked about letter case. And I have some additional ones. I'll take questions if you have about text format. In order for the content to be accessible, but also searchable, because now all of the social media platforms are switching over to where they're not just relying on hashtags for search, right? They're relying on the full copy within. So just like you would optimize something maybe on a page of your website for Google search or something like that, gotta do the same thing in social media. So always use native characters with it. So essentially that just means if you can type it, you're good to go. Now, emojis are accessible. Because the nature of an emoji has a name, right? An emoji has a description. If you've ever noticed, if you send an emoji or something and it doesn't go through the actual text of what the emoji goes through, that's accessible because it's saying no crying face or happy face or computer or live long and prosper or whatever, right? So emoji are completely fine, completely accessible. But you do want to try to use them sparingly and at the end of sentences, right? And don't use them in place of a word if possible, right? Because what the description of that emoji is may be very different than the word you mean, right? Sometimes it can come across, but not necessarily always. So if you want to err on the safe side, also avoid using emoji as bullet points as well. Because a screen reader doesn't realize that that's meant to be a bullet point. It's just saying that's an emoji. So a very common thing on social media is in a bulleted list is to have like the green checkbox emoji text, green checkbox emoji text, et cetera, right? I can't remember if I just said that, but try to use, if you're using emoji, try to put them at the ends of sentences, right? And here's some examples. If you can intersperse them, use them sparingly. Hashtags. This is my next favorite thing to talk about because this absolutely is not just for people using an assistive device. I feel all hashtags should be in Pascal case, where where each word is capitalized. Now, some people, back in the day, talk about this before it was chic. I would talk about hashtags and people would be like, oh, why would we need that? Capital letters, it's so old or whatever. But it just makes it plain old easier to read if it's capitalized. That's not what, and you may have noticed on certain platforms like LinkedIn actually does do some of the capitalized. When you hit the pound sign and start to type, and it'll auto-populate, they will be capitalized. Instagram is still very much not capitalized. You have to go and manually do them. But for it to be accessible, having that capitalization is going to be what makes that hashtag accessible. It'll also avoid any unintended words. That's one thing you have to remember with hashtags, is making sure that there's not any unintended words that you're creating or sentiments that you're creating with a hashtag. You can also use something called camel case. The first word is lowercase, but then the first letter in the subsequent words are capitalized. These are sort of the two accessible options. I prefer Pascal. It's probably because I am a little bit older and I have it's like a little sentence. All right, any questions about formatting or, so for example, this is not accessible, this star. That's not an emoji, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Sometimes it's start with this and that, and kind of break over both sides that. Or you like the comments in what is the most accessible way?
That's absolutely fine. If it's something that you would normally use, whether it's just a regular dash or an end dash or M dash or parentheses, colons, semicolons, all that's accessible. Yeah, if it's regular type. The big thing to remember with formatting is things like bold, italics. The minute you use something that is, a third-party site where you can copy and paste in that text to make something bold or italic on social media, it no longer is acceptable. Because what it does, when it does that, is instead of having those letters be letters, it turns them into symbols that the social media platform can use, but they are not accessible. That's the thing that I see. That's the most common, right? And I understand why people want to do that, right? Because if we're typing in Google Doc or a Word doc, something we want to be bold or italics, or especially if we have a proper name of something that we would usually italicize, we want to maintain that formatting on social media, right? It absolutely, but it's no longer accessible. Okay, let's talk about images. So we definitely want to make sure that the image is the right size for every social media platform. And this is just a general thought here. Always make sure that the aspect ratio is correct, so that things are clear, not blurry, right? It's better to not post an image than to post a super blurry pixelated image that's very hard to read, right? Or hard to see, excuse me. And then, especially for accessibility, we want to have images that have good contrast. So making sure that there are crisp outlines or that the subject of the image is very easy to see against whatever the background is. Very important. That's good for everyone, but that's very important for accessibility. Somebody who might have low vision, right? If there's good contrast to that image, there's a lot better chance that they're going to be able to engage with that image than if it's kind of, all blurry. Now, I say that, and this is a common response that I get to that when I speak to groups is, well, what if the subject of that image, maybe it's a painting, something like that, or the painting itself might not have super good contrast, right? Then that's where we deal with that in description, which I'll talk about in a second, right? But if possible, making sure that we have good contrast is excellent. The other big thing that we do not want to do, and I say this strongly because I see it all the time, is we do not want to embed text in an image. That is not acceptable. This goes also for your website and email, right? Text that is in an image, like let's say you go on Canva and you have an invitation to an upcoming event, and it looks all nice and pretty, and you say, well, I don't want to mess with this format at all. I want to post this, or I want to send an email out with this invitation. Exactly how it looks here. So all of your text in that, you export it as a JPEG or a PNG, right? No screen reader is going to be able to read that. Google is not going to be able to search that on your website because it's not text. Okay. And also, if you think about when we're looking at social media, most of the time in our personal use, we're looking at it on a mobile device. When we're doing it for work, a lot of times we're doing it on a computer. We have to think about who's consuming it. It's probably on a mobile device. With Facebook and Instagram, it's like 97% of their content is consumed on mobile devices. Even LinkedIn at this point is constantly going up. How many people are looking at LinkedIn on mobile devices? And then there are some like TikTok where it's pretty much on a mobile device. So here's an example of what not to do, right? These are blown up super big, right? And even with, it's a little bit grainy, but even though this is blown up, you can see how tiny this text is. And yes, I am calling out the Packers. I'm a Steelers fan. I'm from Pittsburgh. They beat us in a Super Bowl once, and I'm still sore about it. So I'm going to call them out here. But so this is still very, very small, right? Imagine if this was on a small screen, right? The same thing here, right? This also is an example of not the best contrast because it's hard to see here, but this is thin text on a black background. This is the other thing also with websites, talk about this a little bit on websites tomorrow too, is dark text on a light background is always the way to go if possible. Period. It's just easier to read for everyone. It's not to say we want to cover everything. But as a general rule, dark text on a light background. I'm not going to ask if anyone regularly posts social media images with a lot of text in it, even though this is a safe space. But if you find yourself doing that regularly, the next time, what you should do is treat the images as really like a building. When you're driving down the road, well, using the word well, but when you're driving down the road, usually if you're seeing a billboard, it's going to have minimal text on it. And what they're trying to do to catch your attention is the visual on it. So think of the photo or the image in a social media post as a billboard, right? And then the body of the post is where all your text will go. And it's accessible, right? Because this is what the screen reader can read. Right? Now you'll see here, I have an example of, so it has some text in it, right? But that text is also repeated in the body of the post. And we'll talk about contrast here. So if you are using a dark background, so I already said, dark text on a light background, if at all possible. If you are using a dark background for something, make sure, and it does have text on it, make sure that the text is bright and sort of bold so that it's easy to read. Also, don't rely on color for meaning. And we'll talk about this a little bit more before my session tomorrow about website, right? Don't rely on color for some sort of meaning, because if someone has any level of color blindness, they may not be able to see that well. Right? And discern that, right? And so that's left out. So it's not going to be acceptable. Also, avoiding extremes, using like crazy neon colors, things like that. Not only can that be jarring to the eye or hard to read for anyone, but also it can be triggering to certain people, especially with sort of bright colors, or if you're using an animated GIF or a video that is sort of very jarring in that way. Image description. Okay, this is the big thing. So, does anybody use the image description function on social media currently? On any of the platforms? Okay, good. So, at this point, all of the social media platforms have a spot for you to put an image description already built in when you upload the photo. Right? Instagram's got it, Facebook's got it, LinkedIn's got it, right? They've all got it. Use that. Even if it's a photo, and be descriptive on the image description. Right? So you can say, so here's this photo of this adorable baby. I love a little munchie. Baby's wearing glasses. Babies have glasses also. So for this photo, we would say, this is a photo of a Caucasian baby of approximately 6 months old, wearing glasses with dark brown hair and wearing a flower dress and a white kerchief. And I can't see, it's not clear enough. I think this kerchief has like a little bear or something on it. It does. So that's what we would put in the image description, right? Being very descriptive. Now, even if your image has text in it, like let's say it has a couple lines of text, also you would put, it also has text that reads, and say what the text is. Absolutely make sure that you're using the image descriptions. You can also put image descriptions in the body of the post, and you can label the image description, and then what is
That's perfectly fine. Avoid abbreviations in your image description as well, because we all use different abbreviations for things, especially for our organization, right? And I think this is a good rule of thumb just in general, because you never know what's going to be to our content. So writing things out, even if it's the 20th post, a particular event, right? If you're using an acronym, always spell out what that acronym means somewhere in this, right? You know, in the olden times, you know, the rule of thumb, right? You're writing a paper and you're using an acronym, you write it out full the first time, you write the acronym in parentheses. Right? Absolutely do that. Because not everybody reading that, and not everybody is going to see the 20 other posts that you made about it because of the algorithm. That's why we're not using the word. Right? That one post may be the only post that somebody has seen about that particular event. Right, let's talk about audio and video. If you're using video, always make sure to enable the captions. All of the social media platforms have auto captioning available. You probably will need to go in and edit the captions that it automatically creates for you. Because especially with arts organizations, right? Oftentimes it'll get things wrong, you know, terminology or things like that. Or if your video has someone that has a certain cadence in the way they speak, something like that. So always take the time to go in and make sure they're correct. But always use the captioning feature. YouTube, if you upload your videos to YouTube, it's pretty gosh darn good. They're captioning, but still, I still have to go in and make because it's not gonna, especially if you have an accent or something like that, it does not understand Pittsburghese when I start Pittsburghese but absolutely. And this is a little bit our website here because it goes hand in hand with captioning, right? Having a transcript also super accessible and right, not only for people that may be using a screen reader that may have hearing loss, but also most people when they're accessing social media on a mobile device, watch it on silent. So if there is something that's a little bit more long form, you know, if it'll fit logically in the body of the social media post, absolutely you can put the transcript in the body of the post. If it's linking over to something on your website, like that video is embedded on our website somewhere, and you're linking over to that, make sure that you brought a transcript there. There's a number of tools, I'm going to show you a second, a number of tools you can use to automate this process, but having a transcript, here's some for transcripting. Right now, I use not a lot for transcripting. Again, it uses AI to do this. You upload your video, it gives you its best guess. You could go in there, you know, fix what it did wrong, right? And it'll create the transcript for you. All of these. Does anybody use like Otter or anything for meetings? Or yeah. So if you already have like an Otter account, you can upload it, just use it for that as well. Okay. So you will receive the link to this. So, and these are all linked with it. So, but I have a bunch of resources here that will be super helpful, and just for frame of reference, right? There's some contrast checkers. The best ones here really are the simulators, so that you can view content, you know, and simulate a screen reader. Which, has anybody ever heard a screen reader work? Yeah. It's insanely fast. It's faster than you think. It's way faster than what than the speed I'm speaking right now.
right? And when you use a screen reader frequently, you're used to that, right? And so you know what it's saying. But it will absolutely be sort of a really great tool in knowing, if something is accessible or not. Also for contrast, things like that, color blindness simulator, vision simulator, super, super helpful. And if you come to my session tomorrow, I'll get more in depth those kind of things because it's website specific as well. I think that's it. We have plenty of time for questions, thoughts, and feelings. All of the above. The gist of this here is that I just gave you a lot of different things, right? The expectation is not that you go back and implement every single thing all at once, right? It's sort of one at a time. So each time you make a social media post, maybe you're in the middle of a campaign topic right now that you're posting about. You've already got your images set. Maybe you just learned today your images are accessible, right? That doesn't mean that coming here today, you have to completely throw everything out this time and start new, but try to make the rest of the social media accessible as you go. And then the next time, more. So text on the image. Others have said to me that those are the ones that get shared the most, that people get more attention when there is a key text on it. And so having text on just that. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the shareability? I realize it's not accessible, but is it has a wider reach? So if you have text and image, just make sure that it's also repeated in the body of the post. Yeah, and you put it in the image so that you're covered, right? Because yes, a lot of organizations, especially advocacy organizations, will use these, and there is a reason for it because a lot of people may want to save that image, put it in other places, and they want to make it whole, right? If all you did was save that image and send it in an email or post it somewhere else, or whatever, absolutely. Just make sure you've got that text in the body. And you're using it. And it doesn't have the body of the post doesn't have to be like exactly the same thing, but that same information is somewhere. Contrast is pretty blurry. Yeah. Is there a way to kind of the accessibility of that without providing like if no one knows that there's an image, right? That's not necessarily like the building. Yeah. If somebody has visual impairment and they're using a screen reader, it's absolutely going to involve that image description for sure. But you can also add the image description to the body of the post, and that would be helpful for everyone too, right? If it's a low-res image just in general, that would be helpful for anyone to add some details about what is in that image. Colors, subject, the context, anything that would definitely put it. If someone has visual impairment, their odds are they are accustomed to finding that description, right? So they'll know to go to repair. But I would say in the body. I worked on a project, a big project for the American Association of People with Disabilities, as a social media project. And we actually regularly put the image description to both places. Body of the post, so that it's easy, right? And that was our process. And don't be afraid to be
super descriptive. It doesn't do descriptive. And I learned a lot working on that project actually, like even more, and I've already been doing this work for a number of years, but I even learned a lot about how descriptive, especially being able to see what creates the color or the context for an image. You know, it might be what details might be improved, and adding things in like a person's appearance, what they're wearing, how it relates to the post itself. All very important things.
Did you say you had a business partner or something that had access?
Yeah, from what I understand, you'll get a follow-up, or there already is maybe a resource for the slides. They said they're gonna put everything online. I don't know how, like a portal. I believe so. So you should be able to, yes, I'll link it. Yeah, so you'll be able to access it.
Follow up. And all members have access to past presentations.
That's what they said, yeah.
Any questions? Do you have any questions? Our friend on Zoom.
Yes, I put it in the chat. Do these tools all automatically follow ADA 501 guidance?
They do. Yes, they do. So they're going to be ADA, and then there's also something called, so just asking, do these tools that I just shared, do they follow ADA guidelines? There's also something called the WCAG guidelines, WCAG. And so the WCAG guidelines are ADA specifically for digital properties. So WCAG, and we'll talk about this, we should have a drinking game or something for every time I'm going to say the term WCAG in my session tomorrow. WCAG is going to have those additional very specific guidelines for digital properties. So that's really where you want to go if you want to super nerd out about, you know, things like color contrast and fonts and text and all of that stuff. Yeah. And then there's just what you'll see too under checkers, there's this accessibility checker. And that is one of my favorite tools because you're able to, and it's for websites, you're able to just put in your website domain and it'll run it through a quick free accessibility checker. I mean, it's not going to be exhaustive, right? It's free, it's fast, but it'll give you a starting point. It'll give you a score. So it'll give you a starting point to say, here are some of the things, you know, your website score is like a 60, which is not great, right? And here are the top things. And then you'll know by running it through there, is it something I need to take to the next step to make sure it's accessible or not? If you're using a website provider like Squarespace or Wix or WordPress.com or something like that, they have a lot of accessibility things built into their builders already, but that doesn't necessarily mean that site is accessible. Yeah. Any other questions? We're ending 4 minutes early. If you have any questions that you think about later, I'll be here tomorrow. Or if you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, please feel free to come up and ask. Thanks y'all for coming today. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Where are you today?
I am in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I'm
oh
a
my
graduate.
Goodness.
I'm a graduate student at MTSU, and I'm also work for the Park Service at Stones River National Battlefield.
Oh, fun. Well, thanks for tuning in today. This is so fun.